Hello, everybody. It's Matt Powell-Howard here, Head of Product Development at NEBOSH. I'm absolutely delighted to chair this next session on Don't Sleep on DSE Risks, Working from Home Risk Assessments. It continues to be a hot topic. It continues to be a topic that has people scratching their heads. And who better to explain what the Health and Safety Executive's stance on this is than two of my colleagues from HSE. We have Matt Birtles from Science Division, and we have Harjit Tiara, who's from MSD Policy. So rather than me introducing and doing some background on Matt and Harjit, they know themselves far better than I do. So I'll pass the presentation over to them in a moment, and they can introduce themselves and start taking us through the slides. Just a few housekeeping points for you all. Please do take advantage of the attendee chat. There's lots of expertise here and all of the thousands of delegates who all signed up to our online conference. So please get involved in the discussion. You might be able to support, answer some of the questions that you also wish to put to Matt and Harjit. If you do have a question for Matt and Harjit, hopefully we'll address it as we go through this presentation. If we don't, and where we can, we will come back to you, but we will have an awful lot of questions to get through. I hope you will appreciate that. So those we can respond to, we will. And please just get involved, but settle in, and I'll hand you all over now to Matt. Please introduce yourself, Matt.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much for having us at the conference. We really appreciate it and being given this platform to share these ideas with you and just give you something of an update as to what's going on. So my name is Matt Birtles, and I'm a Principal Ergonomist in the Science Division part of HSE, and that makes me something of a nerd when it comes to ergonomics and musculoskeletal disorders. So I'll be here with my close colleague Harjit to talk about where we're at with display screen equipment, especially as we've moved into a hybrid way of working, and we're looking at consolidating all the good work that you guys have been doing during the pandemic, of course, to protect the well-being of your workforce, and how we make that a little bit more permanent and sustainable as we move forwards. But before I say too much, I'll join you back at the end. I'll hand over to my colleague from the MSD Policy team, Harjit. Hi, Harjit.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I recently joined the MSD Policy team in October last year, and I worked for HSE for over 30 years in various secretarial, admin, and operational support roles. And I've been carrying out DSE assessments now for over 20 years. Today, I'm going to talk about the challenges that hybrid working presents with regards to the DSE regs. They still apply as they stand for office workers and hybrid home workers. The regs are old, but you still have the same duty of care for hybrid home workers. So the DSE regs apply to workers who work at home, or if they routinely split their time between their workplace and home on a permanent or long-term basis, and if they work on display screen equipment daily for continuous periods of an hour or more. The solutions may be different, but the regulations themselves stand absolutely. With regards to DSE regs themselves, under Regulation 2, analysis of workstations to assess and reduce risks, you still need to provide hybrid workers with a risk assessment. You need to ensure that where the regulations do apply, home workers can achieve a comfortable, sustainable posture whilst working with DSE, and any equipment provided is safe and suitable for use. We expect that you will make reasonable provision for workers at home, as you do already for those going in the office. So it's nothing new. It's just about how are you going to make that happen at home. We're not suggesting home visits for assessments. For hybrid workers, employers, you do the same as you do in the office. You need to do a risk assessment. You somehow have to make the worker knowledgeable about the risks, and that can be by the workers completing a self-assessment after they have been provided with suitable training. For example, you have online programs like Ergonomist, Safety Media, British Safety Council, and there are others as well. It can be by providing workshops that you put on for yourself as well, or it can be just by getting all the information from everywhere. For instance, from the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors, you've got the HSE website, and you can collect all the information and make the worker aware of the risks before they carry out a self-assessment for themselves. You've also got on the HSE website the SK1 form as well that can take you through the process. And it's a free copy, and it lists the risk factors and issues to consider, and it gives you a space to record any planned action as well. So employers should have regular one-to-one discussions with employees to review their home setup, working arrangements, and what might be required, and to talk about any potential controls that they require. And where you have a portion of people with more chronic problems, physical disabilities, aches and pains, that's where you want to make sure that the occupational health provider can support you with expert advice. Longer term, hybrid workstations, they don't have to be perfect, but they do have to be proportionate to risk. So that may mean people work off a laptop with a separate keyboard, mouse, and are able to elevate the laptop to a decent position. You may not be able to get everyone a nice office chair, but at least give them some good information about feeling supported. It could be that whilst they were sitting, just by using the cushion, they could feel more supported. It's about getting that information and knowledge across to people. So just to recap, what we do expect is that people are trained up and knowledgeable so that they can carry out a self-assessment at home. It's up to yourselves, the employer, to decide what is practical, what is proportionate, but do so, with engagement with workers, with the individuals, to meet their individual needs. HSE stance on individuals doing their own self-assessments is that you provide the employee with all the information so that they can carry out their own risk assessment after making sure that you have gone through what the risks are and provided them with the competence, knowledge and skills. The majority of workers will be okay to carry out their own risk assessment, their own self-assessment, and that could be via online DSE tools. It's not a cheap solution, and we recognise it does take a lot of management effort to make sure that that is happening. The DSE risk assessment, it is a living document. It captures that time, and you would need to regularly review that document. Make it part of your regular meetings. Don't wait until there is a problem. Keep DSE arrangements under regular review. And I just wanted to finish by saying how important it is that workers take breaks, and that a lack of breaks, it is quite serious. Although there is no legal guidance about how long and how often breaks should be for DSE work, and it does depend on the kind of work you are doing. Taking short breaks, for example, every 5 to 10 minutes every hour is better than 20 minutes every 2 hours. I'm just going to pass it back to Matt now, who's going to take you through some of the legislation.
Thank you, Harjit. So what we've done for, I guess, the second half of this presentation is, Harjit and I have done this before, with Matt actually, about a year ago, and we've gone through some of the questions that were raised at the delegation then. And so what I've tried to do is, for this next part of the presentation, just try and preempt some of the questions you might have on your minds, because someone did about a year ago. So the first part of this, in terms of still policy and guidance on DSE, is who pays for the equipment? We often get asked if someone has got some reasonable adjustments in the office, for example, you may have already got provision of a desk, a chair, decent monitor, and so on and so forth. If we are having people work at home as a hybrid solution, or maybe as home workers, it's a bit simpler perhaps, who pays for their chair to be at home? Who pays for the table to be at home? The answer is quite straightforward. It's in Health Safety at Work Act Reg 9. The employer pays. We mustn't be asking our DSE users to be purchasing their own equipment to enable them to work at home as a hybrid. If they choose to do that anyway, I must confess I'm an ergonomist. My house is absolutely full of gadgets and wizardry from the ergonomics fraternity. I do choose to buy stuff on my own. That's okay, but never at the volition of the employer. If the employer asks you to work at home, then the employer should be providing for and paying for any equipment for you to do that. Another question that often gets asked is, what about special cases? What if I've got a very expensive chair in the office, £600, £700, £800 chair, and I actually am going to work at home for a couple of days a week. What does that look like? Well, it's not straightforward, and it's got to be, and you'll hear myself, Harjit, and other colleagues in the policy division talk about this being part of the consideration of someone's risk controls. So based on a risk assessment. What am I saying there? If you've got a very posh and accommodating chair in the office, for example, do you need that chair at home? Well, your risk assessment said you do need that chair for the majority of your time. That's why you got one bought for you in the office, for example. Do we need it at home? Well, that would depend on how long we're at home for. If it's just a day a week or half a day here and there, or just the bookends of a day, then potentially not if the exposure isn't that long. But if you're working at home, I don't know, 3 out of 5 days a week, then probably yes, you probably do need it. And there's a line to be found, to be explored. That line to be explored as to whether you need the same kind of equipment in the office and at home, repeated. That's the base of that. We can't tell you that, unfortunately. I wish we could. It would make life simpler. The basis of that is on the risk assessment and discussion of risk controls between the user and their line management. So not a straightforward answer, I'm afraid, but it's not going to get simpler than that. Let's get onto more familiar ground, perhaps. Harjit mentioned already a couple of times about enabling our workers, especially our hybrid workers, to provide the input to the risk assessment at home. And mentioned a couple of times we need to inform our users, inform our workers how to do that. We need to provide them with some training. What does that training look like? Well, it could be hours of PowerPoint. Everyone loves that, perhaps. See how you feel by the end of the day. But actually, what we're trying to get across here, not necessarily is the media. You could put this together. You could buy some of the off-the-shelf training sources. It doesn't really matter. What you're looking for, though, is making sure that your users are familiar with what good posture looks like and how to achieve a good posture through adjusting their own furniture. So it could be specific, especially if you've got some really funky office chairs. You need to be telling the users what all those levers do and how they adjust the chair to make it fit their body. Maybe how to arrange a desk space, so things that you use frequently you bring closer, and things that you use less frequently put further away, those kinds of issues. Things like adjusting screen, lighting in the home, use of blinds and so on, as you would in the office. We want to get that across to people so that they know the importance of doing that in the home. And then, as Harjit mentioned already, breaks and change in activity, fundamental. You could buy the most amazing workstation equipment known to humankind, and if you use it long enough, you're going to get aches and pains. Fundamental to well-being in the computer, especially when we're working a hybrid or working at home sort of scenario. We know that step counts reduce significantly. I don't know if anybody still aims for 10,000 steps a day. Well, you lose about 4,000 to 6,000 just by staying at home instead of going into wherever our workplaces are. It's not that the workplaces are magic. It's the walk to the public transport, the walk across the car park, the walk to get you a cup of tea. That's the magic. We need to keep up those steps. So if you're working at home, if you've got hybrid workers spending more time at home, getting that message across is fundamental. And then as a part of this, how they use that knowledge to contribute to their own risk assessments. And as Harjit said, using CK1, using our own checklists, or devising yours based on ours. There's nothing special there. But how then to report problems, so you want fast reporting of any issues, aches and pains, to catch them earlier. Hopefully that'll be part of your line manager's discussions you'll have, but that needs to be included formally in some of that training so that your workforce are enabled to know what to do when things start to get a bit achy and painy and go south. So on our website, not without its controversies because we've used these very simplistic images, but on our website are the key basics for setting up a workstation. You absolutely should, could, and feel free to copy these, use this language, and include this in any training you provide or any information you provide for any of your home or hybrid workers, as well as your office workers. And we deal with the key issues with posture. We're not trying to deal with everything in these. We're trying to keep it simple if we possibly can. The kind of things that I imagine most of us are familiar with, but just in case, I'm going to use up 2 minutes of our agenda time to run through this with you. Things like where the screen placement should be. So the top of the screen should be level with the eyes. and the screen should be about tickle to punch arm's distance away, depending on what you're working on, I suppose. Hopefully a tickle for most of us. When we're sitting, we want to be relaxing our shoulders, so we're not shrugging in our shoulders, elevating them. That's often caused by the keyboard being a bit too high. So number 3 there, the keyboard should be positioned just below elbow height, so that your hands are just running downhill. If your arm's lowered by your side, roughly a 90 to 110 degree angle in the elbow. The seat height wants to be adjusted, so you've got equal pressure at the front and back of your thighs. So wherever you're sitting now, especially if you're with colleagues in the room, just feel your own thighs, give your bum a squeeze, especially at the front of your thighs. If your seat's too low, it'll be very, very easy to get your fingers underneath your thighs. That can lead to you sitting on your bum bones, your buttocks, or your ischial tuberosities. It just reduces blood circulation in your lower limbs. If your seat's too high and your feet are swinging, it'll be hard to get your hand under your thighs. Again, that can just reduce blood circulation to your lower limbs, leading to discomfort. So it's those sorts of bits of information we're putting on here. A couple more, especially here, because it was quite controversial, number 5. Make sure you've got good support in your lower back. A couple of things happen. First of all, you maintain the curve of your lower spine, of your lumbar region, and also it stops you slumping too far in the seat, which happens to all of us after just a few minutes. It gets harder and harder to sit there, and a bit of a lumbar support in your seat back, nicely positioned in the curve of your spine, will help you just avoid some of that slumping by holding it right in the seat. Similarly, again, on our website, please feel free to use this. We've got some guidance for laptop setups. We often get asked about this, and our message hopefully is quite straightforward. If you're working at home, if you've got colleagues working at home on a laptop, you want to provide them one, if not both of these things. Either a separate screen so that they can have an independent keyboard position and screen position, or a separate keyboard and mouse with a laptop stand or a pile of books or something. So they can elevate the laptop screen higher by using separate keyboard and mouse, so they've got independence of where the laptop is compared to their keyboard. If anybody's working on laptops for long periods or foreseeable periods, we all get caught out for a day, of course. But if people are hybrid working for a number of days a week, we do want to be providing them with the ability to get a decent office-style posture at home. And that generally means on laptops, either a separate keyboard and mouse or a separate screen. And then, because it gets asked so often, and it's great that so many of us have got sit-down workstations, I must confess, because I'm a bit of a nerd, I have one. I'm standing up as I'm speaking to you now. There are lots of variants of sit-down workstations now. Some of them are relatively inexpensive, 160 to 200 pounds, for example, that you put on a standard desk. They can be good adaptations for people with lower back pain, for example. And still sedentary work. Standing is not brilliant, it's just different from sitting. And so if you are using sit-down workstations, hopefully you're making the best use of them. The assessment of them is very straightforward. Take CK1, the standard DSE assessment, and get rid of the chair. Just redo the assessment, but without the chair bit. So you're making sure that everything else in your workstation is in the right place. And just as some guidance, as enthusiastic as you may be, if you start to stand yourselves or you provide somebody with a sit-down workstation, please don't let them just stand up all day. It takes a phased introduction to be able to sit and stand comfortably. And so, give them a few minutes in the hour to begin with standing until they start to get a bit fatigued, and slowly build up to roughly 50-50 sitting and standing, like an hour each, for example, which is approximately what I do here in my home workstation. What you want to make sure, though, is that no one's standing for more than 2 hours on stretch, otherwise you can get prolonged standing fatigue. And you don't want to be standing for much more than 4 hours a day. And so ideally, an hour on, an hour off is very sustainable if you are providing people with sit-down workstations. And once again, another question we get asked an awful lot, so that's why we're addressing it, is with dual screens. How do we set those up? Especially if you've got a laptop, and you're using a separate screen to run the laptop on, it's great to have a laptop alongside your screen. You've got your emails there and your kind of workpiece here, for example. What you want to be doing, how you want to set up a laptop or dual screens, is you want them to meet in the middle for starters. You don't want a big gap between the two of them. So you can scan across from one screen to another without having to focus and then refocus. You want them the same focal length. You want them approximately the same height as best you possibly can and the same distance, so that when you're scanning across, your eyes aren't having to make big accommodations to different lengths, different heights and things like that. You want them sort of angled a bit towards the user. Don't worry too much about that, but you want them angled a little bit towards the user. And you want to ask, find out from a user, which one are they using the most? Is there one screen they're using 90% of the time? And then the other screen, like your laptop screen, just for a bit, check emails or whatever. If that's the case, you want the screens offset by that much. So your principal primary screen wants to be mostly in front of you, but then the other screen that you're using less often, just to one side slightly. If they're using both screens exactly the same amounts, have them meet in the middle. So you're spending equal time looking left, looking right, scanning across the screens. So it's unusual to put that in at the end, but that is a question we've been asked an awful lot of. Hopefully that dispels some of those myths or increases your understanding. Look, there's a lot more information on this. If you don't mind the cartoons, the first place I would go to is our own website in HSE. There'll be a couple of links here. We'll try and get them across to you. Don't start writing these down. We'll find a unique, cool way of getting those across to you. But we have revisited our guidance since emerging from the pandemic, and our guidance is now set up about achieving sustainable hybrid working. So do have a look at that. It's got the new policy lines in that Harjit was mentioning earlier. And at the same time, if you like a cartoon, the Chartered Institute for Ergonomics Human Factors, the IHF, they're putting out an awful lot of good stuff. We're involved in lots of it. Would absolutely stand by what they're saying. And so once again, a link to their home working guidance, which is still as pertinent in hybrid or sustained hybrid, well worth a look. They've taken a few things out. I think of there, we had temporary standing workstations out of ironing boards and things like that. A lot of that stuff's gone out of it now, that was aiming sustainable home working. So even if you looked at it during the pandemic, still worth nipping back to the Chartered Institute for Ergonomics Human Factors site, just to see what the updates look like. And I think I've just run out of slides. And so what we'll do is hand back to Matt, who will hopefully have a bunch of questions that hopefully Harjit and I can hopefully answer. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Harjit. I probably should say I do have a really good work setup at home, but the reason why I'm staring down at the screen is because I had to come somewhere with a reliable Wi-Fi signal. But that's what I was going to say, but actually after that last slide you did on dual screens, I realized actually my setup needs changing, because I spend an awful lot of time actually looking at my laptop here and then not looking at this oofing great screen I've got in front of me. So there's a bit of work to do on that, and I'll be looking into that. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Harjit. And it was interesting as well what you said about steps and moving around, and you never said this, but sitting is the new smoking. We're hearing all these sorts of things, and sometimes when you actually think about how active you've been in a day, it's alarming. I'm talking to a colleague recently from a large construction company. They're actually putting sitting down as a physical hazard within their risk assessments, and they're starting to address that and doing all sorts of initiatives to get people up and moving around and whatnot. So that's great. So we do have some questions for you both. Before this presentation, I did put a post out on LinkedIn and asked for some questions. Also, very fortunate, we work with lots of HSE specialists at NEBOSH, of course, and I asked them if they had any particular questions to fire at you two. And how often do we get to put HSE in the spotlight and fire lots of questions? So this one is linked actually to something which Harjit said, and I was really taken with the fact that DSE assessments should be living, breathing documents, because all too often, we sit down at Cardinus, other assessment tools are available, but it's a really well-known one. It's good as well, from my perspective at least. And you fill it in, and then you don't go back to it if everything's green. You just go, oh, that's it, done for another year. So one of the questions that was asked is there a set frequency for reviewing DSE assessments? Should it be annually, or more, less frequently? So over to, who's going to take that? Harjit or Matt?
I'll take it, Matt.
Thanks, Harjit.
I would say it would be sort of reasonable to expect, you know, once a year that you regularly review your risk assessment. Again, also it is down to the individual as well, and it's individual to each person. So depending whether there's any underlying medical reasons or whether they've had special equipment, and that is to check in. So I would sort of say when you do have regular meetings with your employees, just to check in with them as well with regard to DSE or health issues and things like that. And if there are any sort of health issues and that, just to be even more frequent as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Harjit. So, Matt, well, I thought you were going to say something there. Sorry.
Yeah, just to agree. I think for the most part, many assessments, you'll not address them for another year or even longer, perhaps. But as you can imagine, as line managers or people supporting line managers, where you've got people with more acute needs, as with anything, you just talk about it more often. And every time that you're having those discussions, use those as prompts to readdress the risk assessment, just have a look again, make sure some of the things are being ticked off or improved adequately so that the user's comfortable. So yeah, exactly the same answer as Harjit. I just wanted to get a last word in on that one.
Clues in the title, isn't it? It's risk assessment. You know, if you've got somebody who's more vulnerable, you know, spend more time talking about it, I guess. So this is, you won't be surprised, either of you, to know that there was a common theme that came through around chairs. Now, you've mentioned chairs, about, you know, how much money do we have to spend on chairs? What do we have to buy for people? So one of the questions we were asked was, if you're working from home, are you required to provide the worker with an office chair? And I think you sort of alluded to that, Matt. Or can the user sit on a dining chair if they can get in a comfortable working position, please? Because some people, obviously, they don't have the space in their own homes to have lots of the furniture cluttered around. So would, for example, a dining chair suffice if somebody was comfortable in using it?
I'll have a go at this one. Again, and you're going to see this answer come up again and again and again. It depends on the risk assessment, and the risk assessment is the outcomes of the risk assessment is what informs the answer, really. If somebody's done a risk assessment for home, it's relatively low risk. In other words, they're not too far away from half decent in their setup at home, even though they've not got an adjustable chair. They are free of ailments, free of injury, or free of aches and pains. And they're not spending too long at home, for example. If it's just a day in the week, for example, then you probably can get away with a dining chair, but with some really well-informed cushions, or you can buy, you know, specific DSE cushions to fit on standard chairs as well. But just a cushion or two from your sofa to make sure they've got support underneath them, a decent supported lumbar sort of area of the spine. Yeah, you could get away without buying a second office chair if the risk assessment says things otherwise relatively low risk. However, the same situation, if the risk assessment says things are potentially of higher risk, then you'll need to manage that somehow. We don't want to dilute or justify not managing risk. We want to look after people. And so where the risk assessment is indicating it, you actually may need to get a second office chair for that individual, or have them, you know, work where there is an office chair. Unfortunately, that could mean that the individual might be asked to come into the office more or entirely, so that you can get them seated on a decent chair that's going to look after them. And so the risk assessment has to you know, guide your thinking, guide your approach to this. Our risks still need managed. Need to be managed. It's how well you can do that. And if I can just throw one last thing in for me, who says a chair is the right place to be for many people? Often we turn to our really very, very good accommodating chairs, nothing wrong with them, apart from people sit in them all day. And maybe not for the last time, just a reminder that sitting for 16 hours a day isn't very good for you. There's lots of evidence now to talk about sedentary and the health impact of sedentary and prolonged sitting. So where people have got issues, it may well be that the nice chair is the reasonable adjustment that works the best. It may well be that sitting less is the thing that works the best. And so while you're looking at this, do consider sit-down workstations, other alternative ways of working, equally to reduce exposure to what will be a compromised chair if it's a dining chair with cushions.
Great, thanks, Matt. So Harjit, I have a question for you here, and it's a bit of a tricky one, really. But is there a date for when we're likely to see updated HC guidance to DSE regulations? The law itself may still be fit for purpose, but updated guidance is badly needed. I'm not writing this question, by the way, Harjit, don't fall out with me. And would have been great to have had pre-pandemic. I assume the meaning around home working. The CIEHF and other resources are all great, but would even better if they just complemented updated core HC guidance. So I suppose in summary, is there any additional formal HC guidance on DSE going to be released anytime soon? Is there any plans for it to be released?
I think where we are at the moment, we are reviewing it and we are looking at it. So that's all the information that I
oh, no,
can
that's
give at this point. Yeah.
No, that's fine. It's always best not to promise anything. No, that's perfect. Say it's a tricky question to ask. Matt, this is really just to underline things that you've alluded to throughout your presentation, really. Are employers required to undertake a specific home-based risk assessment, or is a self-assessment by the user sufficient?
It's a really good question. Certainly, it wants to be a specific assessment for that individual at their home, and so a generic risk assessment is not going to wash on its own. We need to follow up. I'd imagine most organisations will do a generic risk assessment of generic risks and find that certainly office workers, they're exposed to lots of DSE work. That should then lead to specific risk assessments. And I'm going to dial back on this in just a second. But what we need to be having, and as Harjit mentioned first off, we need a specific risk assessment per workstation, really. So most of us, myself, I work a couple of days at home, maybe a week if I'm lucky, if things allow, then I'll have two, and I do have two risk assessments, one for my home workstation and a separate one, which is quite different for my office workstation. That's what we need for hybrid workers. The one for my home workstation, we're very fortunate. We've got a specific one that talks about home issues. You'd imagine an organisation like ours, we've kind of shaped the office workstation assessment to fit home as well, because I work with a bunch of ergonomists. What we would suggest any organisation does, though, is look at CK1, look at the standard, unless you've got your own system, of course, but look at the standard workstation assessment that we have that's for the office in its current format, and look at that and apply that to the home. So whereas in CK1 it might talk about blinds on the windows, at home you could talk about curtains on the windows. It's the same principles that we need to look at in both work areas, work environments. Also, it may be things like in CK1, annoyance from other people's telephones, things like that. Let's be perfectly honest. At home, it's annoyance from, and then choose from a list of whoever you share a house with. And so there will be variations. And by the way, if you don't find anybody else annoying, it may be that you are the annoyance, of course, is what my wife always tells me. But there will be variations. But what you want to do is have two specific assessments at least, one for home, one for the office. If you've not got one for home, then use CK1, the HEC standard DSE assessment, but then best you can apply that to the home environment.
Brilliant. Thanks, Mark. Great answer. And Harjit, one for you. I think it's a really good question, actually. If a large organisation offers training to allow staff to undertake their own DSE assessments, would there be any additional requirement for dedicated DSE assessors, as any complex cases due to injury health issues would be undertaken by occupational health? Quite a long question. Would you like me to ask you it again?
Yeah, I might get Matt to answer this one, actually.
So if a large organisation offers training to allow staff to undertake their own DSE assessments, would there be any additional requirement for dedicated DSE assessors? I think the argument is, well, if anything's complex, we'd divert it straight over to Occy Health. I think that's the question there.
I think. Oh, go on, Harjit.
I was going to say you would be sort of looking at it case by case basis, and it's going to involve you could depending if it's a vulnerable person as well. You've got the user, you've got occupational health, HR might be involved, and your employer's going to be involved. So it's not going to be a straightforward one because each case is different. And Matt, I'll pass back to you.
Yeah, I think within the bounds of that, you still want your assessors, even if you're doing things like online assessments or self-assessments or both self-assessments that are online. When those assessments do raise red flags or raise issues that need resolving, you definitely can go to and use occupational health. And I have to say, occupational health providers across the UK have been incredibly supportive during the pandemic. And I would suggest in a lot of cases, if not the most, things like specific home assessments where we're sending in photographs of our home workstation or using video chat and for in-person assessments, albeit virtually. I think occupational health practitioners have been incredibly good at supporting those kind of systems and mechanisms by which we can do detailed assessments for those who need it. But that does leave a big middle ground of people who've just got transitory aches or pains or just find a bit of annoyance here or there. And I do think while we want to lean heavily on that relationship with line manager to keep addressing DSE and keep making sure things are being managed well, I do think there's definitely space for trained DSE assessors in the organizations that can act as expert kind of opinion, expert consultants to help people manage the intermediate, moderate kind of issues they may come up against. Sometimes occupational health provision can be a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And sometimes, line management who's not informed, not being trained in DSE risk management might not be very useful, as accommodating, as compassionate as they would probably be, and they might not know enough to know how to resolve things. So there's definitely a middle ground that we need DSE assessors. We do not want DSE assessors to be running around with clipboards into people's houses. And so it will be a slightly different role they'll be playing. Unlike when they're in the office and they should run up to people's desks with a clipboard. I think it's a different role with hybrid, but those skills that your assessors have got from doing countless assessments in the office, those skills are still very legitimate, albeit through MS Teams or Zoom or something. They're still very legitimate to support and help hybrid workers. So I would say yes, keep training the DSE assessors up, keep them alive and kicking, and with much gratitude from anybody in health, safety and management, and thank them for their countless support. I think DSE assessors have a very difficult job sometimes, looking at an endless number of different elements and different ways of accommodating people in the workplace. So I don't think we'll be replacing them with online systems. I think they're the first port of call to support us when we've done our online assessments or our self-assessments.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Harjit. Well, I'm absolutely determined to finish this webinar a couple of minutes early to allow people to jump up and start doing some shuttle runs across the garden or jogging on the spot or whatever is possible. We need to get up and move. I think that's been firmly established in this presentation. So I'm going to finish this presentation here. I'm going to thank Matt and I'm going to thank Harjit for your time. As always, I love spending time with you both. You're so well informed. And this is an issue which keeps coming round and round and round again. So thank you for your time. Thank you for everybody who's got involved with questions today and taking part in the attendee chat. Stay tuned after you've got up and moved around, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, guys. Thanks very much.
Thank you.